And next up on our list is Luke Bergmann, who I know from the People CDC and gets I got the most books award here. All his books in the background there. And Luke is a geographer at the University of British Columbia. Actually, he's the author of Neoliberal Ebola, Modeling Disease Emergence from Finance to Forests and Farms. And this means he is allowed to be interested in many different things and processes separately, but especially together. And Luke will speak on patterns of COVID-19 spread in the US Midwest and how they may have been related to modes of agricultural production. Luke, take it away.
Thank you so much. In fact, I am a co-author with so many of you and others elsewhere on all of these projects. So I'm just here to offer a few thoughts and maps and offer you a window into some of the things that we've been working on. Today, in particular, I just wanted to engage how some of COVID, early spread especially, is where we were looking, might be actually quite interconnected with the ways in which we have been engaging in organizing our countryside and our whole society, really, as a result. So we were looking at the US Midwest before the vaccines were made available widely and trying to see what the various sorts of factors associated with COVID spread might be. And we decided to offer a concept that might be of some use. And it's a little bit shaky, but I think there's something here in which most research on COVID didn't really attempt some sort of more holistic understanding about the ways in which production of food, agricultural life, and nature-society relations, urban-rural relations, in fact, as well, are structured over the different parts of the Midwest. That was not really a part of the way most analytical approaches to understanding COVID and its spread worked. So we thought we might coin a term or provisionally work on a term of something like an agricultural mode of production. And in particular, we wanted to think about whether there might be two interrelated types of modes of production, perhaps, in the United States, a more conventional mode of production, agricultural mode of production, and a more regenerative agricultural mode of production. So in the conventional mode of agricultural production, you might have agricultural landscapes that are very much caught up in the dynamic circuits of capital, et cetera, of the larger capitalist mode of production, but with minimal possible regard for the reproduction of social and ecological relations. This is the general baseline of where we are. And without being too, I think, rosy about it, we also see, to some extent, perhaps something worth codifying in what you might call a regenerative mode of agricultural production, where there's a little bit more attention paid to the maintenance of local social and ecological relations. And so we set about trying to perhaps quantify where and how these modes of production exist and might be interconnected. So here was the result of us trying to map the relative entanglement of various spaces with these into these modes of production, this being regenerative and this being more a conventional sort of approach. And we did this based off of a variety of variables that we associated with each of these two generalizations. Actually, this was work that happened with a variety of other people and was published in Land last year. And so some of you are also in the audience for this. I noticed Carolyn and others. But then what we did was we said, so to what extent do those so-called agricultural mode of productions perhaps connect to the spread of COVID, and in particular how many cases of COVID you might have had cumulatively in various counties in the U.S. Midwest for different periods of the early pandemic. So we divided this into two periods, and then we're asking, so how do the things on the right here possibly connect to these two patterns we see in different time periods on the left? And of course, there have been many other ways of studying this, what leads to the patterns on the left here. And so we said, well, we certainly want to look at those as well, and attempt to also control for those sorts of other things that are quite caught up in the spread of COVID. So things like how long COVID's been in a place, perhaps what the insurance or uninsurance rates are in places, what the income inequality might be, the percentage of the populations that at least the census identifies as various types of non-white populations, and life expectancy, employment in various what the shares of employment in various counties are in what are the primary agricultural extractive sectors versus the more manufacturing and processing sorts of sectors, the secondary sectors. We were of the belief that slaughterhouses mattered actually to the early epidemic. So we wanted to count how many of those were and see whether that mattered. And then at the same time, look at how enmeshed these various places seem to be within the conventional and regenerative food systems. And at the same time, we also wanted to make sure that we didn't view places in isolation. So we wanted to also model how places might have had a lot of COVID because they were connected to other places that had a lot of COVID, or they might have a lot of COVID because they, right. So, and we modeled that connection through a possible variety of ways. Is it just because places are close to each other in some driving sense? Is it because they are interconnected with each other through labor, through commuting patterns? Or is it because they were interconnected with each other through the food system, and through how some places are the food system ships large amounts of food from one place to another in the process of producing and processing it. So we looked at all of these different possibilities. In the end, we have a lot of different results, but we did find some things that were common across a number of models. We did find that in all cases, really, the even after controlling for the amount of agricultural jobs, basically, in a county. So how rural was this county in another sense? We found that that might have taken away from the overall burden of COVID, while manufacturing oriented areas might have had higher burdens of COVID. Controlling for both of those, we nonetheless found that quite important was the role of the conventional food system, the conventional agricultural mode of agricultural production. We found was quite related with higher COVID rates, and this more holistic measure of the regenerative mode of agricultural production was very related to lower COVID rates. So doing all this, we also found that these patterns probably differed somewhat over time, but especially over space, that there were parts of the US in which things worked one way, or parts of the Midwest that things worked one way. And then as you got out into the high plains, actually, a number of the relationships shifted among some of these variables, especially the way that regenerative and conventional agriculture played out, because the nature of that agriculture differed in these different places. So also, we did notice one other thing, which among other things was the role that early in the pandemic, the food flow connections between places seem to matter a lot for the spread of COVID. So the presence of links among counties that were not merely the proximity of counties to each other, or merely the presence of commuters traveling from one county to another, but the fact that they shipped food from farmers to processing industries to distributors, those sorts of connections were actually more important, or that led to better models in the earlier part of the pandemic, where these patterns of commuting actually led to better models later in the pandemic. These are just some results for you to think about, and hopefully also, although much less eloquently and much less expansively than a Kenichi or someone else, lead to some sort of argument that paying some attention to these to the detailed empirical and geographical rich texture of how this all works and how things might be interconnected does potentially bear some benefits to our understandings of how pandemics such as COVID worked early on, and how they might be connected to things that we might not have anticipated, these larger social totalities around the ways in which we organize the landscape. Thank you.